The metallic rasp of the blade slicing through the rope became the last resounding sound in my ears as I fell. The wind roared past me, like the screams of countless wronged souls. I looked up at the man who had once been my marrow-deep love, Henry, his handsome face shrinking in my field of vision, written over with determination and a hint of relief. Beside him hung his first love, Vivian. She clung to the other rope with tear-streaked cheeks like a fragile white blossom, and I was the weed cut away to save that flower. "Rachel, I'm sorry." "Vivian, she can't die." Those were the last words he ever spoke to me. Then, like a discarded pebble, I plummeted into the bottomless gorge. Ironic, isn't it? Today was our 3rd wedding anniversary. We were both outdoor enthusiasts. Henry suggested commemorating the day with a 2-person climb. I agreed gladly. But just as we were getting ready to set off, Vivian called. On the other end, she was sobbing inconsolably, saying she'd been heartbroken, that her world had collapsed and she couldn't go on. Henry held the phone, his voice a tenderness I had never heard before. "Vivian, don't do anything foolish, where are you?" "I'll be right there." I stood to the side, my heart sinking little by little. This scene had played out countless times over these 3 years. Vivian, Henry's childhood first love, had gone abroad for 7 years and suddenly returned a year ago, becoming a thorn in our marriage that couldn't be pulled out. She lost her job, and Henry used his connections to find one for her. She fell ill, and Henry ran at 3 in the morning to bring her medicine, leaving me alone on the cold bed. She had a fight with her boyfriend, and Henry could ditch the family dinner with my parents to go keep her company and drown her sorrows with drinks. I wasn't silent about it. But every time, Henry would look at me with those loving eyes and say, "Rachel, don't read into this. She and I are just friends, like siblings. She's alone in City A with no one to rely on, I can't just abandon her." His friends, my mother-in-law, everyone told me, "Rachel, be magnanimous. That girl Vivian is just too innocent. Henry is simply kind-hearted, and you're his wife." Innocent? A woman who can make a married man come whenever she calls, chat with him in the middle of the night, and constantly need Big Brother to comfort her, would she be innocent? I sneered, but could only swallow my grievances and anger again and again. Because I loved Henry, loved him enough to willingly blind myself for him. This time was no different. Henry hung up the phone and looked at me with an awkward expression. "Rachel, Vivian, she's very unstable emotionally. I want to take her out to clear her head. Extreme sports like climbing might help her vent." I stared at him, almost laughing with fury. "Henry, today is our wedding anniversary. And Vivian is a novice climber, taking her to such a dangerous place, are you out of your mind?" "It's okay, I'm here. I'll protect both of you." He came over, put his arm around my shoulders, his voice pleading. "Rachel, just this once, okay? Look at her, I'm really worried." Looking at the worry in his eyes, my heart felt like it had been pricked by a needle. He had never looked at me like that. In the end, I gave in. I even naively thought that perhaps, in front of Vivian, Henry would prove with his actions who he truly loved. But reality delivered the loudest, bloodiest slap. We chose a rock face of moderate difficulty, with spectacular views. Henry led the climb, experienced, Vivian and I followed behind. At first it went fairly smoothly. I deliberately kept my distance from them. I didn't want to watch that nauseating display of sibling affection between the two. True to form, Vivian did not disappoint. She spent the whole way whining and acting helpless. "Henry, I'm scared, my hands have no strength. This rock is so slippery, I can't get up." Henry, meanwhile, displayed boundless patience, instructing her over and over, encouraging her, even expending a great deal of energy to climb up, find her footholds, and then come back down to help. And I, like an outsider, followed silently behind them, the ice in my chest growing ever thicker. The accident happened at 2 in the afternoon. The weather changed suddenly. Without warning, a strong wind rose and a few loose stones slid down from above. Vivian screamed, her foot slipped, and she was instantly left hanging in midair. Her sudden lurch sent Henry, who was on the same safety line, off balance as well. And I, below them, was yanked hard downward by that massive force and slammed violently against the rock face. For a moment the three of us hung in midair like a string of grasshoppers, suspended only by a lone piton in the rock and a single main rope. Ah, help! Henry, save me! Vivian's cry was so piercing it seemed to rend the sky. Don't be afraid. Vivian. Hold on tight. Henry's voice was frantic too. My forehead had split open, blood running down my cheek and smearing my eyes. I clenched my teeth against the pain and looked up. The situation was worse than I had imagined. The single piton, strained by the weight of 3 people, was already showing signs of loosening. The cracks in the surrounding rock were widening. It wouldn't hold much longer. Henry! Listen to me! I shouted with every ounce of strength I had, trying to steady him. You hear me, shift your weight right now, slowly transfer you and Vivian onto the backup rope on the other side, and then use the ascender. Before I could finish, Henry cut me off. Rachel! Don't say anything. I can't do it. His voice trembled with a hint of despair. The piton's coming out. All 3 of us are going to die. No, no. Believe me. We still have a chance. I forced my voice to sound calm, but my heart kept sinking. I know Henry. We've been climbing together for 5 years, his technique, his mental strength, I know them all. It's not that he couldn't do it, he panicked. His whole heart was with Vivian. Henry. I'm in so much pain, my hand is going to break. Vivian's sobs grew weaker, as if at any moment they might stop. I don't want to die. I'm my parents' only daughter. That fragile crying was like a sledgehammer, shattering the last shred of reason in Henry's mind. He stared fixedly at the wobbling piton, then glanced down at the breathless, sobbing Vivian. A streak of mad resolve flashed across his face. Then he lifted his head and looked at me. In that moment, our eyes met, and I saw something in him I had never seen before. It was apology, it was pain, it was struggle, but even more, it was a cold, merciless determination willing to sacrifice everything for a single goal. My heart stopped for an instant. An absurd and terrible thought slithered into my mind like a venomous snake. No. No. He wouldn't. He is my husband, we made vows, to be together for life, never leave each other. How could he? Rachel. He spoke, his voice was hoarse like sandpaper rubbing. I'm sorry. My blood froze in an instant. Henry, what are you doing? My voice trembled uncontrollably. He didn't answer me. Instead, he took a sharp climbing knife out of the gear pack at his waist. That knife was the birthday present I gave him. German-made, it cut through iron like mud. In the sullen light it reflected a bone-chilling, icy glint. Henry, don't. Vivian saw his movement too. Not only did she fail to stop him, she cried even harder, yet in her eyes there flickered an almost imperceptible look of expectation and cruelty. I saw everything. So this was her true face. It turned out I was the most ridiculous fool of all. Henry! I screamed in a hoarse, piercing cry, like a dying cuckoo. How dare you? He closed his eyes, as if he couldn't bear to look at my face. Rachel, you're the strongest, the one who takes care of herself best. His voice drifted on the wind, light as a sigh. But Vivian is different, she's been in poor health since childhood, she can't be without me. What a pathetic excuse. Because I'm strong, I should die? Because she's fragile, she deserves to be rescued even at the cost of my life? I looked at him and suddenly laughed. The laughter turned into tears that streamed down, mixing with the blood on my face, salty and bitter. 3 years of marriage, 5 years of our relationship, turned out to be nothing but a joke. I, Rachel, 28 years old, ruthless and decisive in business, feared by everyone, had been utterly defeated in love, left broken and raw. Henry, I stopped laughing, my voice cold as ice in a canyon. You will regret this. Sorry. He apologized again, then, hand rose, knife fell. Scree, that sound was the cruelest melody I had ever heard. My world spun. A sense of weightlessness enveloped me in an instant, like a leaf swept up by a gale. Utterly powerless, I plunged into an endless abyss. In the last second before consciousness slipped away, I thought I heard Vivian's relieved sobs, and Henry's gut-wrenching cry. Rachel. Hypocritical. Disgusting. Pain. My whole body felt as if it had been taken apart and put back together, a ripping ache coursed through every limb and bone. I forced my eyes open. What met me were mottled shadows of trees and a gray, hazy sky. I was still alive? I wiggled my fingers, a stabbing pain made me suck in a breath. I looked down and realized I was lying on a massive, horizontally growing cliff cypress. The tree was rooted in an inward curving crag, like a natural shelter. It was this tree that had saved my life. I struggled to sit up and checked my injuries. My left leg was broken, twisted at a grotesque angle. My right arm was dislocated, hanging limp. Countless scrapes and bruises covered me. The wound on my forehead had already begun to scab, dried blood sticking to my hair, itchy and painful. I had never been so disheveled. Yet I couldn't feel the pain. The wound in my heart hurt 1,000, 10,000 times more than every injury on my body combined. Henry's resolute face, Vivian's triumphant sobs, and that knife that severed every tie between us, like a scene from a film, kept replaying in my mind. Each frame felt like a poison blade, repeatedly tearing into my heart. Love? It had long since vanished. What remained was nothing but an overwhelming hatred. Henry, Vivian. You thought I was dead, didn't you? You thought you could be together in peace, using my life to consummate your great love? Dream on. As long as I, Rachel, still have a breath in me, I will crawl out of hell and with my own hands drag you too, this pair of dogs, down into the 18th level of hell, never to be reborn. A fierce will to survive and a flame of revenge blazed in my chest. I cannot die. I absolutely cannot die here. I endured the searing pain and began to take in my surroundings. This was the mid-slope of the canyon, neither sky nor earth within reach. My phone had long since been slung somewhere and who knew where. I had to save myself. With my only usable left hand I unfastened the gear pack at my waist. Thank God it was still there. There wasn't much inside, a small bottle of water, half an energy bar, and a first aid kit. I first used the bandage from the first aid kit to bind my fractured left leg to a thick tree branch, fashioning a makeshift splint. Then, gritting my teeth, I slammed my body against the rock face and forced the dislocated right arm back into place. With a crack, searing pain blacked out my vision and I nearly fainted. Cold sweat soaked my back in an instant. I panted hard until the dizziness passed. Then I took out the half-energy bar and ate it in small bites. I had to conserve my strength. Dusk crept in. In the mountains the temperature plunged at night, the cold wind cutting at my wounds like knives. I curled up against the trunk, cold and hungry, the injuries throbbing in waves. In the darkness, I could almost hear the howls of beasts and the hissing of nameless insects. Fear surged over me like a tide. But I bit my lip hard, refusing to let a sound escape. Only one thought filled my mind: survive. I will come back alive and see the looks of horror and stupefaction on Henry and Vivian's faces. I will make them pay the most excruciating price for what they have done. That thought, like a flame, sustained me through the long, cold night. The second day, the third. 2 days passed. I had run out of water and food. My lips were cracked and bleeding, my throat felt as if it were going to smoke. I began to hallucinate. I saw my parents, anxiously calling my name. I saw the mountain of paperwork at the company and the subordinates waiting for me to return and make decisions. I also saw Henry. He still had that gentle expression, reaching out his hand and saying, "Rachel, come home." I violently shook my head and bit down on my own tongue. The searing pain snapped me awake. Awake to the realization that that gentle Henry was dead. Dead the moment he raised the knife and cut my safety rope. The Henry before me now is my enemy. He is a murderer who tried to kill me. I cannot give up. I used the last of my strength to rummage through the first aid kit and pull out a survival whistle. Then I began to blow. Beep, beep, beep. The shrill whistle echoed through the empty canyon. I didn't know if it would help. All I knew was that this was my last hope. I blew for a while, rested for a while, conserving my energy. Time passed second by second. My consciousness began to blur. Just when I thought I was truly going to die there, a buzzing sound approached from afar. It was the sound of a helicopter. The rescue team. A surge of ecstatic joy burst within me, and with every ounce of strength left I blew the survival whistle. Beep, 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 my voice was hoarse, but full of power. Soon, a helicopter was circling overhead, a rope dangling down, and a figure in an orange rescue suit descended before me like a god. Miss. Are you okay? Hold on. We're here to save you. Seeing him, my tears at last broke free and poured down. I was saved. I could go back and take my revenge. When they carried me down to the makeshift medical tent at the foot of the mountain, I saw two people I had dreamed of tearing to pieces, Henry and Vivian. Both of them had changed into clean clothes and looked completely unhurt. Vivian was leaning against Henry, sobbing softly, looking as though she had been grievously wronged. Henry held her, murmuring comfort, his face full of pity and concern. Police and rescue workers gathered around, seemingly taking their statements. What a picture of devoted love and deep emotion. If not for my unseemly appearance as a corpse to spoil the scene. They carried my stretcher over. Every eye snapped to me. The air seemed to freeze in that instant. I watched the tenderness and pity on Henry's face instantly change into utter shock and terror. His pupils shrank abruptly, his mouth opened wide enough to fit an egg, as if he'd seen a ghost at noon. Vivian, cradled in his arms, looked even more drained of color. Her plaintive, fragile face instantly lost all its blood, going ashen as paper, her eyes filled with disbelief and venom. Yes, venom. She resented me for not having died. Watching the two of them wear those exquisitely expressive faces, I suddenly felt the pain in my wounds ebbing away. I turned to them and, slowly, pulled a cold smile across my lips. Henry, seeing me still alive, are you disappointed? My voice was low, but it detonated like a thunderclap, echoing through the stunned crowd. Rachel? Henry finally found his voice. He trembled, pushed Vivian out of his arms, and staggered toward me. You're not dead? Thank God. You're really not dead. He flung himself down at the edge of my stretcher, trying to take my hand, forcing a look of rapture onto his face, with tears beginning to well in his eyes. Thank heaven. I knew you'd be watched over by fate. Rachel, you scared me to death. I thought I'd never see you again. His acting was disgustingly good. If I hadn't endured that hellish fall and the 2 days and nights of desperate waiting myself, I might almost have been fooled by the way he looked at me with such tender devotion. I raised my only working left hand and dodged his touch. Don't touch me. My voice was cold as ice. I find you filthy. Henry froze mid-movement, his expression hardening. Rachel, what are you saying? I'm saying don't let that hand of yours that has held a knife and tried to kill me touch me. I spoke with absolute clarity. It makes me sick. My words made everyone around gasp. Their gazes, full of curiosity and suspicion, flicked back and forth between Henry and me. A police officer came over and asked sternly, "Ma'am, what did you mean by what you just said? What do you mean you were killed?" I ignored the officer, my eyes, from start to finish, were fixed on Henry. I wanted to see how he would try to talk his way out of it. Henry's face had shifted from deathly pale to a sullen, leaden gray. The panic in his eyes flashed briefly, then he put on an expression of anguished grief. Rachel. How can you say that? I know you're hurt and angry, but how can you sully me like this? He turned to the police, wearing an anguished face as he explained, "Officer, don't listen to her nonsense. The situation was extremely urgent, the piton came loose and the three of us were all hanging there. Suddenly a strong gust of wind blew, and Rachel, she lost her footing and fell. I tried to save her, but there was no time. As he spoke, he closed his eyes in pain, two clear tears rolling down at just the right moments. I'm useless. I didn't protect her. It's all my fault. If I could, I'd rather the one who fell had been me. What a melodramatic display of loyalty and sorrow. He should have been an actor, it's a wasted talent. Behind him, Vivian immediately caught on, covering her mouth and sobbing uncontrollably, joining in the performance. Yes, officer, please don't blame Henry, he really did his best. Sister-in-law, when she fell, Henry completely lost it, crying like a child and trying to jump after her. I had to hold him back with all my strength so he wouldn't do something foolish. I know you're angry with us, but it's really not what you think. She wept as she looked at me with a reproachful gaze that said, "How can you be so unreasonable?" The two of them echoed each other, turning truth on its head, twisting a premeditated murder into a tragic, regrettable accident. The people around us began to look at me differently. Yes, a woman who had just faced a life-or-death ordeal, distraught and speaking nonsense, could be seen as understandable. And her husband, though culpable for failing to save his wife, was also a pitiable victim, inconsolable with grief. If I were an onlooker, I might well have believed their story. Too bad I'm not. Watching their earnest performance, the bitter laugh in my chest nearly burst out of my mouth. Is that so? I said softly, cutting off their performance. A slip and a fall? Slowly, I pulled something out of the pocket of my windbreaker. It was what I had instinctively gripped tightly in the moment of the fall, the severed end of my safety rope. I held it up in front of Henry, showing it for everyone to see. Henry, tell me, what kind of misstep could make a professional dynamic climbing rope, 10.5 millimeters in diameter and able to withstand over 2 tons of tensile force, snap so neatly? The rope's severed end was smooth as a mirror. It bore the mark of a keen blade, cut clean through in a single stroke. It could not possibly have been worn through by rock, nor snapped from excessive strain. It was the mark of a knife. Everyone's gaze fell on that length of rope. Among those present were many professional rescuers and climbing enthusiasts, and they could see the problem at a glance. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. This break, it's definitely been cut. Too clean to be an accidental snap. What's going on? Could what she said be true? Henry's pupils contracted violently again. He stared at the rope in my hand, and the color drained from his face in an instant. He could never have imagined that I would still be holding such damning evidence after what had happened. No, this isn't. His lips trembled, unable to form a single complete sentence. Not what? I said coldly, closing in on him step by step. Not something you did? Then where is your climbing knife? The birthday present I gave you, the razor-sharp German climbing knife, where is it? My knife. Henry's eyes began to flit away. My knife, in the chaos, it accidentally fell. Fell? I laughed, a laugh that brought tears to my eyes. Henry, oh Henry, your talent for lying really has stayed rotten for 10 years. I turned to the policeman who had remained silent the whole time, my voice suddenly rising, full of accusation and righteous fury. Officer. I want to report a crime. I, Rachel, formally accuse my husband Henry and his first love Vivian of conspiring to cut my safety rope during the climb, deliberately attempting to murder me. This piece of rope in my hand is evidence. The injuries on my body are evidence. I demand that they be investigated immediately. Search their belongings and find that dropped murder weapon, where is it? My voice rang across the entire camp. Everyone was stunned by my words. Henry and Vivian's faces could no longer be described as pale, it was a kind of ashen decay reserved for the dead. The officer's expression turned instantly grave. Please stay calm, Ms. Rachel. We will verify the matter you reported immediately. He shot a look to his colleague beside him. Mr. Henry and Ms. Vivian, please come with us to the side to give statements and have your equipment inspected. No. I didn't. This is unjust. Henry bristled like a cat with its tail stepped on, instantly exploding. He pointed at me and yelled hysterically, "Rachel! You lunatic! Why are you doing this to me? Is it because I was with Vivian and you were jealous, so you invented these lies to get back at me?" His words reminded me of Vivian, who had been standing trembling behind him the whole time. I turned my cold gaze toward that fragile white lotus. "Miss Vivian, your turn. Didn't you say he was so grief-stricken that he was going to jump with you to be with me?" I looked at her, a cruel curve forming at the corner of my mouth. "Would you mind letting the police check your clothes to see if there are any cuts from a sharp object?" I remembered it clearly. When Henry cut my rope, Vivian was right beside him. The knife was so close to her. In that chaos, the blade could very well have accidentally nicked her clothing, or even, her skin. Vivian's body went rigid. Instinctively, she covered her left arm with her hand. The movement, though only a momentary one, was keenly caught by me. It was also fully observed by the police nearby. "Officer. I didn't. I don't know anything." Her voice trembled beyond control, tears streaming down like beads cut from a string. I was terrified at the time, I didn't see anything. "Sister-in-law, why are you doing this to me? I know you don't like me, but you can't falsely accuse me like this." She tried to resort to the old trick again, using tears to win sympathy. But unfortunately, in the face of ironclad evidence, even a flood of tears only made her look more conspicuous. The two officers had already stepped up to them, expressionless as they said, "Mr. Henry, Ms. Vivian, please cooperate with our investigation." Henry wanted to resist, but a single fierce look from the police cowed him. He stared at me, his eyes full of malice and unwillingness. As if I were the monstrous killer. I met his gaze without fear, in my eyes there was only endless cold and derision. "Henry, the game has only just begun." The police were efficient. In less than 10 minutes they found the blood-stained climbing knife in the hidden pocket of Vivian's backpack. The blood was mine. And on the knife's handle, Henry's fingerprints were clearly imprinted. At the same time, the forensic team found a cut made by a sharp instrument on the sleeve of Vivian's left arm jacket. There was both eyewitness testimony and physical evidence. Henry and Vivian were detained by the police on the spot. Paramedics strapped me onto a stretcher and rushed me to the city's best hospital. Lying in the ambulance, the first person I didn't call was my parents. I dialed Tom, the company's chief legal counsel. "Tom," my voice was hoarse from weakness, but my thoughts were razor-sharp. "Do two things for me. First, draft the divorce papers immediately. I want Henry to leave empty-handed. We had a prenuptial agreement, everything under his name, cars, house, company shares, are all increases in value of my premarital assets. I have the right to reclaim it all. Second, I'm going to file criminal charges of intentional homicide against him and Vivian. I want them to rot in prison." On the other end of the line, Officer Tom was clearly stunned by my words. "Boss? What happened? Are you hurt?" "A little accident, not fatal." I recounted calmly. "My husband, for the sake of his first love, pushed me off a cliff." "Oh no, he cut my rope." I could imagine the shocked expression on Tom's face. "Okay, boss. I understand." He quickly regained his professionalism. "Don't worry, I'll handle both matters immediately. You focus on recovering, leave everything else to me." After I hung up, I let out a long breath. Outside the car window, the city lights came on one by one, each one dropped behind me in turn. My heart, however, was calmer than it had ever been. Without love, there were no more vulnerabilities. From now on, I, Rachel, will live for myself. I stayed in the hospital for a whole month. During that time my parents rushed over from out of town. Seeing me covered in wounds, they cried as if their hearts would break. I told them everything that had happened, exactly as it was. My father was so furious he wanted to storm into the police station and confront Henry on the spot, but my mother held him back with all her strength. "Dad, Mom, don't worry." I took their hands, my gaze steady. Your daughter isn't someone who can be easily beaten down. I'll settle this with them, bill by bill, until every score is paid. Henry's mother, my mother-in-law, also caused a scene at the hospital a few times. The first time she came was on the third day of my stay. She burst into the ward, not to ask about my injuries, but to heap a torrent of accusations on me. Rachel. You vicious, poisonous woman. What on earth did you tell the police? Why would you want to harm our Henry? Like a shrew, she pointed at my nose and ranted. Henry loves you so much, how could he hurt you? It must be you. You must have clumsily fallen, and now you're turning around to frame him. What a cruel heart you have. What sin did the Chen family commit to marry such a jinx like you? I looked at her face, twisted with fury, and didn't even have the strength to argue. I simply pressed the nurse call button at the head of the bed. Soon, nurses and security personnel hurried in. Show her out. I pointed at my mother-in-law and told the guard, from now on, this woman, and every member of the Chen family, is forbidden from setting foot in my hospital room ever again. You dare. My mother-in-law trembled with rage. Rachel. I'm your mother-in-law. Do you have no respect for your elders? The moment Henry turned a knife on me, you stopped being my mother-in-law. I looked at her coldly. Get out. The guard hauled her away. She rolled and screamed in the corridor, crying and making a scene that drew a crowd. I didn't even bother to lift an eyelid. The second time she came, she brought a lawyer and a letter of forgiveness. By then, Henry and Vivian had already been formally arrested and were being prosecuted for intentional homicide. She had shed her previous arrogance and, before me, wept bitterly. Rachel, I'm begging you, please spare Henry this once. He's still young, he can't go to prison. If he goes to prison, his whole life will be ruined. She pushed the letter of forgiveness toward me. Rachel, if you sign this letter, the Chen family is willing to compensate you. Our old house and all my savings, all of it to you. I'm begging you, in the name of the family we once were, have mercy and let Henry go. I looked at that letter of forgiveness and found it utterly ridiculous. Let him off? I stared at her and retorted, and who will let me off? When he pushed me off the cliff, did he ever think to let me off? When I lay in the mountains, despairing and waiting to die, who came to let me off? My voice was not loud, but each word struck like a blade. My mother-in-law's crying faltered, her face growing sour. But, wasn't that an accident? Henry was momentarily confused. Momentarily confused? I sneered. To save a first love, he could murder the wife he vowed to keep. That's momentary confusion? In your eyes, your son's future matters more than my life, doesn't it? My mother-in-law was left speechless by my question. I picked up the letter of forgiveness and, in front of her, tore it to pieces, bit by bit. Go back and tell your son to be ready. On the day of the trial, I'll appear in court myself to testify and send him away. I flung the scraps of paper into her face. For the rest of his life, he'll be in prison, let him repent properly. Rachel. You venomous woman. Mother-in-law, seeing that pleading was useless, revealed her true colors again and pointed at me, cursing. I closed my eyes, too weary to look at her another time. Whatever she said could no longer shake me in the slightest. A month later I was discharged from the hospital. My leg was still in a cast and I needed a wheelchair. On the day I left, Tom came to pick me up. He told me the divorce had already been finalized. Because Henry was at fault, and we had a prenuptial agreement, the court awarded all our marital property to me. Henry truly walked away empty-handed. I also, through Tom, handled the civil claims against Henry and Vivian. They are required to jointly compensate me for my medical expenses, lost wages, and emotional damages, totaling more than $3 million. Of course, I know they can't pay that sum. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that I will leave them with nothing. The criminal trial is scheduled for 2 weeks from now. During these 2 weeks, I spend my time at home recovering while also dealing with the company's backlog of affairs. I thought this matter would simply end that way. Unexpectedly, 3 days before the trial, I received an unforeseen phone call. It was Vivian's parents. They apologized to me profusely over the phone, then asked if they could meet me. I was going to refuse. But one sentence they said changed my mind. They said, "Miss Rachel, we know some secrets about Vivian and Henry that might be useful for your lawsuit." I agreed. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe. Vivian's parents, Thomas and Susan, were a middle-aged couple who looked honest and upright. When they saw me, they bowed deeply. "Miss Rachel, we are sorry, we raised our daughter poorly, which led her to do such a monstrous thing." Thomas's face was written with guilt and weariness. "We're here today to atone for that wicked daughter of ours." As he spoke, they handed me a brown paper bag. Inside are all of Vivian's expense records since she returned to the country, and her chat logs with Henry. We secretly copied them from her computer. I opened the paper bag in confusion. Inside was a thick stack of A4 sheets. I flipped through them one by one. The more I read, the colder my heart grew, and my hands trembled uncontrollably. The spending records showed that in the year Vivian returned to the country, she had almost no source of income. Yet she lived an extraordinarily lavish life. Designer bags, high-end cosmetics, 5-star hotels, on every bill, the payer was Henry. It turned out his so-called support was nothing more than boundless maintenance. And those chat logs plunged me into an ice pit. "Henry, I just fell in love with a bag. Will you buy it for me?" "Sure. I can't bear to see you work so hard, I support you." "Henry, did Rachel argue with you again?" "It's my fault, maybe I should leave." "I don't want to come between you two." "Don't say that, it's nothing to do with you. She's too petty." "Vivian, rest assured, no one matters more to me than you." "Henry, what we're doing, doesn't it hurt Rachel?" "It doesn't. The one I love is you, from beginning to end, there's only you. Marrying her was just a business arrangement, for my family's interests." "A business marriage?" I stared at those 4 words, trembling with rage, my hands nearly crushing the paper. "Henry and I were college classmates. We loved each other for 2 years, he tended to me in every way, gentle and considerate. After graduation he proposed, and I believed we were made for each other. My family was wealthier than his, with my father's help, my company had indeed given Henry's family quite a few contracts. But I never imagined that, in his heart, our marriage was merely a transaction. And I was just the woman he had to marry for the sake of business? How absurd. How cruel. Miss Rachel, please don't be angry." Susan looked at my ashen face and spoke cautiously. "Actually, Vivian, this time she came back to take Henry away. She thought you had taken everything that rightfully belonged to her. So she planned all of this?" I lifted my head, my eyes were rimmed with red. "Yes." Thomas nodded painfully. "The climbing was her idea. She said she would stage an accident so that you would disappear forever. She said that once you were dead, Henry would belong to her completely." "And Henry," I almost bit out the words, "did he agree?" "He was against it at first." Susan sighed. "But Vivian, she told Henry she was pregnant, that the baby was his." Boom, something inside my head exploded. Pregnant? Vivian pregnant with Henry's baby? Of course, it's a lie. Thomas explained immediately. She tricked Henry. She calculated that Henry would feel guilty toward her and that she wanted a child, so she used that lie to force him into it. I see. So that was the last straw that broke Henry. A woman he had loved for so many years, and now she was carrying his child. And I, the wife in this marriage of convenience, naturally became the expendable, the unnecessary obstacle. I understood. I understood everything. I put the documents away and nodded to Vivian's parents. Thank you. These mean a great deal to me. It is we who should thank you. Thank you for not giving up your life and for exposing their crime. Thomas stood and bowed to me again. Miss Rachel, we have only one request. Let the law take its course, we will accept whatever sentence is given. We only ask to see her one more time before she is executed. Their faces bore the deepest sorrow of being parents. I was silent for a moment and said, I will convey your request to the judge. 2 weeks later, in the courtroom. I sat in the plaintiff's seat, looking coldly at the couple in the defendant's dock. We hadn't seen each other for days, and both of them looked worn down. Henry's face was covered in stubble, his eyes dim and lifeless. Vivian was even more haggard, none of that pitiable charm she once wore remained. When they saw me, their gazes were full of resentment and fear. The trial proceeded without much drama. With witnesses and physical evidence in place, their defense lawyer had almost no room to argue. Henry adamantly insisted it was manslaughter by negligence, claiming he only meant to cut the rope to lighten the strain on the pitons and never expected me to fall. As for Vivian, she washed her hands completely of it, claiming she knew nothing and saw nothing. Ridiculous. When it was my lawyer's turn to present the case, Tom laid out, one by one, the evidence I had obtained from Vivian's parents before the judge and the jury. Henry and Vivian had been carrying on an illicit relationship for a long time. The two of them conspired together to stage the climbing accident. Vivian even used the lie of a fake pregnancy to coerce and accelerate Henry's murderous intent. Each piece of evidence struck like a heavy hammer, shattering their lies to pieces. Henry completely collapsed when he saw those chat records. He stared at Vivian, eyes bloodshot and full of disbelief. You lied to me? You weren't pregnant at all? You've been deceiving me this whole time? Vivian trembled under his gaze, unable to utter a word. For you. Henry suddenly went mad, trying to lunge forward to strangle Vivian. You bitch. You ruined me. I'll kill you. Bailiffs swarmed and pinned him to the ground. The whole courtroom descended into chaos. I watched the farce with a cold eye, feeling not the slightest ripple in my heart. Finally, it was my turn as the victim to make the closing statement. I pushed the wheelchair and slowly moved to the center of the courtroom. I looked at Henry, being held by the bailiffs, still thrashing wildly, and at Vivian, collapsed on the floor, her face ashen. I opened my mouth, my voice was not loud, but it carried clearly across the whole courtroom. I have nothing much to say. I only want to tell them, and to tell myself, when a person can lift a butcher's knife and strike down someone they once loved, they have already ceased to deserve being human. I stand here today not because I was lucky, but because God has eyes. He spared my life so that I could watch you two beasts receive the punishment you deserve. I ask the court to impose the harshest sentence in accordance with the law, without any leniency. Having said that, I turned my wheelchair and, without looking back, left the courtroom. The clamor and insults behind me no longer had anything to do with me. The final verdict was delivered. Henry, convicted of attempted murder, his guilt proven beyond doubt and his methods cruel, was sentenced to life imprisonment. Vivian, as the mastermind and instigator, was also sentenced to life imprisonment. They will spend their long, remorseful lives behind bars. When I received the judgment, I calmly tossed it, along with the wedding photo of Henry and me, into the fireplace. Flames rose, turning those unbearable days into ash. A year later, my leg had fully healed. I stood up again, taller and steadier than before. I ran the company with meticulous care, and its performance tripled. I took up my trekking pole and safety rope again and conquered one peak after another, each higher and more treacherous than the last. Every time I stood on a summit, looking down at the sea of clouds and the ranges below, I would think of that fall. It was not an end. It was my rebirth.